And I wondered, couldn't we democratize skills? Couldn't I actually transmit my physical skills through the internet? Sustainability should not cost. Digital, this inclusion should not cost. So above all, make sure you remain human.
Hello and welcome back to the brand new series of the Teens and AI podcast. My name is Adya and I'm your new host for this podcast. Today's episode is being hosted by Michaela and Emily, my incredible co-hosts, where they are talking to Mischa Dohler, Professor in Wireless Communications at King's College London, Fellow of the IEEE and Policy Advisor to Governments in issues related to digital skills and education. Topics we discussed today include Professor Dohler's vision for the Internet of Skills, global democratisation of tech through 5G and 6G, and the confluence of tech and music. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and look out for further content behind the scenes, advice for teens interested in AI, and announcements about future episodes on our social media, Twitter and Instagram at Teens and AI Pod.
Hi Mischa, thank you so much for coming to join us today on the Teens and AI podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
So can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your career, maybe some of the work you've been doing recently?
Right. So I actually wanted to become a professional pianist. So I'm a musician by heart, and I was enrolled in the conservatory, and I actually chickened out. It's probably the first time in my life, and the only time in my life I chickened out. And I decided not to do it because my mom told me, "Yeah, Mischa, I like 200 brilliant pianists coming out of this conservatory, and nobody really knows why one is better than the other." So I decided to do what was my other passion, which was science and math. So I studied physics, ended up doing technology, and then ended up being in London. And this is now where I can really feel I feel I can really combine my passion for music and for technology, and really have this, kind of creativity with technology one-on-one. So this is my story really in a nutshell, and more in details, in last years, I've been driving very much the 5G agenda here in the United Kingdom, together with other academics. It was not just me, it's quite a big ticket. So, we built the UK's very first operational 5G system. As part of this, we demonstrated some really amazing use cases, and maybe we can talk about this later, including related to music. And now we're on to 6G. We always need to look into the future, but that's roughly what I'm doing and what I've been up to.
Amazing, that's so interesting. I'm also a musician, so I love to always talk about the ways in which we can use tech and art to intersect and really explore that whole area. And I know you've been doing some work actually around that area, and you've been exploring those things. Can you talk about some of the projects, some of the really exciting stuff you've been doing around the intersection of music and 5G and tech?
Yeah, so the 5G, for those who don't know what it is, so yes, it is 4G plus 1. Okay, so that is kind of the boring part, and the exciting part is that you get now a performance which is, in my opinion, is a real game changer. So, and it's not necessarily the bandwidth or the data rate as we call it, right? So yes, we will have 10 times more data rate, so you can download your whatever Netflix or YouTube video quicker. But I don't care so much about this. Another big thing which really happened with 5G is that very, very low latency. So, the time it takes now between me clicking on a link and getting the response back, sometimes even in 4G, you just wait for a while for this to happen. In 5G, we'll go like this. And we got the latency, as we call it in technical terms, down to 10 millisecond and below. Now, for websites, it doesn't matter. But it matters for human engagement. And I tell you why, because we as humans are geared towards a 10 millisecond engagement. So when you and I, the three of us are together in one room, the visuals of you being in the room come straight into my eye. It goes into my, into my cortex, and it's being processed. So all the signals which happen within like 10 milliseconds, my brain knows that you're with me. You're like physically with me, and we are building up this feeling of immediacy with a lot of emotional kind of connectivity, right? So when you have somebody in the room, you either like the person, don't like the person, you're very attracted, or you're distracted. So all that kind of magic which builds up when we are together isn't building up with Zoom. Okay, it's just not happening. And one of the reasons is because the latency is so high. So just me talking to you now or doing this podcast here, you know, the latency is probably 170 milliseconds. So with 5G, we get it down to below 10, and suddenly we can build what I call, you know, synchronized reality. So I believe that will enable use cases which go beyond augmented reality or virtual reality. It's really synchronizing different physical spaces and give that, you know, that feeling of immediacy. And how do we apply that in the arts world? Well, you can imagine artists playing together without being actually in the same room or in the same, you know, kind of a stadium or performance venue. And now with COVID, you know, we had loads of artists requesting, what could we really do with this new amazing technology? And we had pioneered that with my older daughter Noah. We did the world's first 5G concert. So I was in Berlin playing the piano under the Brandenburger Tor, and she was in London, you know, singing, and we were separated by 1,000 kilometers, and yet it felt as if she was with me. It was so emotional, you know, that night I really struggled not to cry. So this is really what I think this amazing technology can bring to us in the arts world.
Wow, that's really nice. I also hear you talking a lot about the Internet of Skills and how that can be used using AI. Can you elaborate on this a bit more?
Yeah, so the Internet of Skills is another brainchild of mine. You know, and maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, you know, I wondered what's going to be the next internet. So we designed the fixed internet, you know, which is the cabled internet. You take your computer, plug it in, that's kind of our standard internet. Once we had done this and we connected, like, you know, millions of computers, we kind of thought, what's next? And we built the mobile internet. So now we have billions of these devices connected. We did 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. Now I'm doing 6G. So we did that. And after that, we designed the next generation internet, the things internet. You know, we connect things, sensors, actuators. The proper name is the Internet of Things, but it's nothing else but a things internet. So you connect, you know, sensors, trillions of devices to come. And I wondered what's next, right? So the Internet of Things has been around now for 20 years. Really, and in 2014, I asked, what's next? And I realized that, you know, the current internet is able to transmit sound. It's able to transmit, you know, video, text and all that. So it has, in a sense, you know, democratized information. I wouldn't necessarily say knowledge, but at least information. And I wondered, couldn't we democratize skills? Couldn't I actually transmit my physical skills through the internet, right? Couldn't I actually repair an engine, a car? Could I teach somebody how to play the piano, or somebody teaches me, you know, how to paint? And that is possible if you build a very low latency network. Suddenly we have 5G, so it's possible. We have robotic end equipment, so exoskeletons and really advanced soft robotics, which is coming along. And we have AI, and this is where artificial intelligence really comes in. Because if you want to build an internet which is truly global, which goes across the globe, you have this annoying limit on the speed of light, okay? So if I go from London to Los Angeles, it's 36 milliseconds latency. So how do I get 36 milliseconds down to 10 milliseconds? Because remember, we need that feeling of immediacy if it goes below these 10 milliseconds. And this is where artificial intelligence comes in, because AI is able to predict a lot of things. So, you know, I'm an animal of habit. The way how I play the piano, how I paint, or how I do surgery, or how I repair the car is roughly always the same. Hey, we are able to predict this. So if I want to play a piano concert or teach somebody in Los Angeles, the engine in LA is predicting what Mischa will do playing the piano. And equally, you know, my student would essentially always behave in a very similar fashion, and the AI in London would predict on how my student would behave. So we have this interaction between two AIs, which helps us to stabilize really that link. So this is why AI is so important together with 5G and robotics to enable that Internet of Skills, which I hope will democratize skills the very same way as the internet has to democratize information.
That is so fascinating. And when we're talking about this democratization, you know, we hear this phrase a lot, but one thing I'm curious about is how do we ensure that the Internet of Skills truly democratizes on a global level, not just in, you know, first world and developed countries, but how can we actually make sure it truly democratizes and doesn't widen the digital divide between underdeveloped and developed countries even further?
Really good question. And the answer is, there's no silver bullet to this. So there is, of course, quite a bit of technology work to be done to make this as cheap and therefore as accessible as possible. I call that affordability to all. Yeah. And I give you an example. So, one of my companies is, doing sustainable coffee capsules, Nespresso. Nespresso is all aluminum. So we came up with a new material. Company is called Movingbeans, and we are currently selling compostable coffee capsules. And we said, this should not only be premium coffee and sustainable, but it has to be affordable to all, because we didn't want to make this a divide. Sustainability should not cost. Digital, this inclusion should not cost. So therefore, from a tech point of view, we still need to really work to make sure that the cost goes down. Then we need to put policy in place. So there's quite a lot of policy work there to be done, because you will realize that particularly to bridge that digital divide, there's often no business case, and specifically if you look at, in connectivity, and I know that because, I'm on the spectrum board of Ofcom, which is our regulator on these issues, and we discuss that problem quite frequently. And you have, digital connectivity in an urban environment, dense city, in suburbia, and in rural, right? So in the urban environment, there is a business case, no problem. In suburban, the business case becomes really weak, but then regulation can kick in and say, you should actually provide 90% or 99% coverage to make sure the people who commute and work there in the suburbia can actually have connectivity. But if you really want to make that inclusive, it has also to work in the rural area, and there's no business case there. We know that, right? So therefore, there needs to be a new way of thinking around, policy work at government level, and all that needs to work together with the demand side. So it needs to be good demand, good technology, needs to be business case, and needs to be policy. So I'm afraid, this is not just somebody taking out a big checkbook and say, I want to make, a complete social inclusion. It will not work. You really need to work along 2 or 3 dimensions at the same time, and often they advance at different speeds. And that is what we really struggle with. How do we really make this happen? So the answer is, I don't know. We'll need to see how this plays out. But clearly, we're making sure that this technology will not be used for anything, in military purposes and all that. So really make sure that we keep that technology clean and really, really help humans where humans can help humans, if that makes sense. Yeah.
That sounds really good, really good. And how do you see 5G implemented in cities for all consumers, and when can we expect this?
So in UK has actually been, very quick in the 5G rollout. We have been one of the leaders in deployment, and that is really because we have been evangelizing the government for quite a while that 5G will be instrumental, to connectivity, GDP, happiness, and you name it. So currently, if you're in any of the bigger metropolitan areas and you do have a 5G phone, you actually get 5G connectivity, right? So you can enjoy that already today. But you need to live, let's say, in an urban environment. Some suburban environments have that. So I live, in the Kingston area. We do have 5G. You need a 5G phone. Apple announced now they're going to do 5G phone. The Samsungs have it. So there are quite a few of these. So we have it today. It's maybe not very consistent. I think by 2020 and 2021, end of next year, maybe mid 2022, we'll have a very consistent urban experience. In 2023, a very consistent suburban experience. And then by 2025, I hope we will really see that taken off in rural areas. So, to some people, it sounds very disappointing. It's like 5 years to go, but I want to be realistic. And I also want to position that with respect, let's say, to 4G and 3G. This is still much, much quicker because we made some very big changes to the infrastructure, how it works, so we can roll out that kind of innovation progress much quicker.
Great. And can you just elaborate on, really briefly, some of those challenges that you are facing in rolling out 5G in a really universal way?
Yeah, so it's clearly an infrastructure cost. So the more, wireless, how it works, I'm having my mobile phone, I connect to the base station, and the base station might be mounted somewhere. In fact, I don't even know where the one is around me. I should know. It's very embarrassing. But anyway, when you're in central London, you would see that very quickly. And these base stations typically are fiber. So there's a fiber coming out of this, and that goes with some processing essentially to the to the kind of the headquarters of the different telco companies. And the fiber is very expensive and the rooftops are very expensive. Okay. Now the rooftops are roughly kind of, already allocated. So I don't think there will be in the initial stages a massively new amount of base stations being deployed, but the fiber needs to be upgraded. The reason is because 5G fires through so much more data that the majority of our, let's say, fiber infrastructure is not anymore fit for purpose. So that requires an upgrade. We need to change the actual base station hardware. We need to change our hardware from something what we call purpose-made hardware to commodity hardware. And that's the big transformation we've done in 5G. So think of it that before, when we went from 3G to 4G, the big vendors, companies like Ericsson or Nokia or Huawei, essentially build purpose-made boxes. And to build purpose-made boxes, it takes a long time. That's why it took us like 10 years to go from 2G to 3G and 4G every time, 10 years, And now we have done something big. We said, let's get away from these purpose-made boxes and start using commodity servers. So simply, anything you can buy, Dell, HP, any of the fairly cheap, so they're not really cheap, but much cheaper than the purpose-made boxes. You put them in racks and data racks, and then you load all the magic, the 5G, security protocols, you load it in software. And that allows us now to innovate in 6G much quicker because we suddenly don't have to think about the infrastructure anymore. We can really think about architecture, protocols, new security ways, new privacy mechanisms. And with a single mouse click, in theory, you can install it around the globe. So that's, I think, the biggest challenge now to do that transformation.
Yeah, wow, so that sounds really good. And about having a global internet coverage, how do you look at the Starlink network from Elon Musk?
Really good question you're asking. So, I am excited about this. Okay? I'm excited about it for a global connectivity point of view. Okay. Maybe less excited from a pollution point of view, I have to say, because these rockets pollute a lot when they're being shot up. So clearly we need to work on that. There's a lot of space junk flying around, so we're just increasing the probability of that happening. But let's assume we have solved this at some point. The global connectivity is really important. And the reason it is so important is because it may just crack that business model problem we have with rural areas. Okay, so if you think of a rural area connectivity, it is, there's no business case for EE or Vodafone or, O2, etc. to deploy base stations. It's just very expensive to do that because you need to pay for the hardware, you need to pay for the fiber, and in the end you connect, just a few people. Using that Starlink connectivity, you could actually probably argue that there might be a business case. And why I think this is because there's another company which has proven that works, and that is Amazon. So if you think of Amazon as a business, initially it was selling books, but it wasn't selling the books which we found in our bookstores, 20 years back. It sold the books which we did not find in our bookstores, for which, the big Waterstones didn't have a business model to store all the models, right? In fact, Amazon catered what we call for the long tail. So there are millions of books, which maybe authors sold 1, 2, or 10. In contrast, Waterstone, was actually storing 10 and sold millions. All right. So Jeff Bezos catered for that long tail, and he could prove that if you do the long tail business model globally, thinking beyond national borders, then it works. And the same may happen with our connectivity. It might be that the local national kind of connectivity business model doesn't work. But if you look at the Starlink model, which connects the whole world and really caters for the rural areas to start with, there might be a real business model there. So to be confirmed, that's why I find your question so interesting, because it might be the answer to all these problems we had for the digital divide, particularly in the rural and the less privileged areas.
Yeah, I do. I really agree with you. And you talked about the Internet of Skills earlier, and it would be really nice if we can use that in poorer countries. But of course, those countries don't have a business case for a 5G connection. How can we deal with that?
Yeah, so the business case for big infrastructure rollouts is always a very, very complicated thing. Okay, so there is, at least in the urban and suburban areas, no matter where you are on the planet, there is actually a business case, and typically you will find that this capital bill, as we call it, so paying for the base station rollouts, which goes in the billions. Okay, actually the operators are not really paying for that. There are big investment houses which pay for that, and then the operators pay back that money. They take it as a loan, essentially, to roll that out. This is how it works. I think it's more interesting to examine what happens in the rural areas, in areas where you really want to bring in that digital connectivity to shorten that digital divide, and maybe create something which is a self-perpetually growing ecosystem. Because one thing is, you're laying a fiber, so assume the government says, okay, I want to connect the rural areas of Uganda or of Rwanda, okay? And they pay, let's say, for the fiber rollout, but in the end, what people do, because they have never taught, they've never been taught how to use that technology for building companies or get educated. They only use it to watch Netflix or whatever there is in that region of the world, okay? And, this is what I think the government really needs to think more holistically. If they really want to, shorten that digital divide, and they really want to build a business model which is a long-term business model with self-perpetual growth capability, then they should think 360. So it's not only paying for the infrastructure, or giving the loan for the infrastructure. It is educating the population on how to use it at schools, how to teach the kids, how to build companies, how to use the Udemys of this world to really get to this educational level, so that these regions in Uganda or Rwanda or anywhere in the world, can start essentially building its own kind of business community, innovation community, startup community, educational community. We could have teens in AI actually in that area. That is how you have to think. And the government, sadly, or whoever does the business case, doesn't have that horizon, because it takes time. It really takes a lot of time. And as you know, companies need to have quick returns, and governments need to have returns over the legislative period, which is anything between 4 and 5 years. So we need somebody more wise to think really into the longer future.
It's so interesting to think about just the potentials beyond, most people think within the scope of tech, but actually politically, economically, when you think about how global governments interact in global systems, it would completely revolutionize the whole global landscape we have today. So it's so interesting to think about. And going back to your sort of brainchild, the Internet of Skills, what I'm really interested in understanding is, your vision for the future of that, particularly in a pandemic affected world. What are some of the potentials you see for these interactions of AI, 5G and robotics to help with some of the issues that we are facing in 2020 and 2021?
Yeah, a really great question. And I've been pondering about this, and I would like to see a phased approach. So the first one would be maybe to really capitalize on this amazing potential of this emerging very low latency technology called 5G. Okay, and we may not get it right. We may need to wait for 6G. It may consolidate a bit later, but just building back this kind of emotional bond between humans, even though they may sit behind some digital screen, that for me would already be a very, very big thing, because you could again connect families. Loads of families are torn apart, where the grandparents don't see their kids, where parents can't see their young children who are maybe at university. So just bringing back this emotional bond, and still, recognizing that we are physically not together, that would be an amazing thing. And I think that would be the first baby steps. The next thing would be kind of bring this full immersion. And for this, we need, advanced tech like, virtual reality. I don't believe much in this, to be honest, because I find it very limiting, VR, but augmented reality, together with the holographic capturing. So, there's really interesting stuff coming out. I have an app on my phone called Clone, Qlone, where you can actually capture 3D content holographically And then imagine you do that with ourselves, and we could actually recreate this chat we have right now on a fully augmented reality projection, with you being with all of us being holographically displayed, and have the low latency to give it a full feeling of immediacy. Suddenly, wow, this is much closer to the real thing, right? And would really get us through, I think, very critical times like these, and help help diffusing a lot of tension, which I think has built up, in people. And then last but not least, and that's maybe fairly far out, bring maybe that feeling of touch with haptic technology. So we trial these haptic gloves where you can feel things. Can you do this? Could you actually, then really go to the Internet of Skills and have, I had an emergency during the COVID crisis where some of our pipe broke, and the plumber was not allowed to come. It would have been great if we had the Internet of Skills, and he or she could just actually execute that skill remotely, or guide me somehow with an exoskeleton to solve a task, which is very, very kind of, domain specific. And maybe a future which is a bit like the Matrix, right? Where you download that skill. I want to learn how to do Kung Fu. Then I want to learn how to play like Chopin, or I want to paint like Van Gogh, So maybe that's a future. Maybe it's a bit geeky. Maybe it's a bit freaky, but, it's undeniable.
That's so interesting. If that is ever the future, you're going to have to really be a pioneer to stand out in a world where you can just pick up the piano just like that, or learn to paint just like that. Yeah. And in terms of the timescale of things, because it's clear all of these amazing things that you're talking about reconnecting some of the isolated, some of the vulnerable, even through some of the touch technology and things like that. It's really clear that technology like that would be so in need during a pandemic and during the sort of the tail end of the pandemic. But in terms of the timescale, how much of that development is in process? How long do you think it's going to take before we get to that point? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so things happen quite quickly and also quite slowly. Okay, so I'm not sure who said it. It might have been Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. One of them said, or somebody else, we completely overestimate what we can do in 5 years and completely underestimate what we can do in 10 years. And actually, that applies exactly to this question you're asking me. So, we cannot have that Internet of Skills capability in 5 years. I'm realistic about it. I build a few companies. I do a lot of innovation. I do a lot of research. I know what the timescales are. At the same time, currently AI is moving, at a speed which I would almost define beyond singularity. So, in the words of, let's say, physics, we're moving now quicker than the speed of light. So stuff is coming up every day, every week, which is mind-blowing, okay, mind-blowing. Which means that a lot of that predictive stuff, a lot of that atomized engagement stuff, which is required to do part of the vision I've been laying out, can actually be done probably within the next, months. And just look at, the last one which blew me away was not the truly last one which blew me away was yesterday, when I had seen an AI using GPT-3 to generate essentially a lyrics in an Eminem type of style, and then a deepfake voice putting it on Eminem's voice, and then having Mark Zuckerberg sing it, okay? All done by AI. And you just sit in front of this and you think, this is Eminem, right? This, in his universe, the lyrics, which often don't make a lot of sense. They're very cryptic and all that. And, AI really captured that. So we are able now to build digital artists or even clone a digital artist. NVIDIA last week, 2 weeks ago, announced they're able to actually use AI to predict how I move my face when I talk, right? Meaning that we don't need to transmit video anymore. They just essentially let it run, maybe a bit of voice, but, there's a lot of prediction being able to bring down this bandwidth, which we will probably, have when we start transmitting holographic images and all that. We don't need it anymore. AI can take care of that at the edges. So there's new stuff coming out every day. And so therefore, I think in the next 5 years, we will see a substantial uptake on this very atomized content creation, content consumption powered by AI, which gets better by the day. And beyond these 5 years, in 10 years' time, I think we will see that internet of skills, which allows us to transmit skills through the internet, through touch and muscle movement.
Yeah, that's really nice. And there's a lot of potential in AI, for example, deepfakes, but there's also some danger with this. How could people distinct deepfakes and real people talking on video?
We don't know. And, that is, it's a great question. It's a really great question. And we when I say we as a community got really worried about this, okay? Really worried because the power is infinite. You can do what you want, okay? And in fact, we got so worried about this that, we as a community set up a commission now to look at, this body was just formed last week or 2 weeks ago to look at, how to actually, how to create a platform of observation. I call that a platform of observation for trying to figure out, what is really real, what is not real. But here's the problem, right? The way how these deepfakes are generated, they're in fact two brains already working against each other, right? And this is the whole field of GANs, or these general adversarial networks. You have essentially two smart brains playing against each other. One is creating content randomly, and the other one is saying whether that randomly created content makes sense. Okay, and if that judge, the second one is trained on real images of real people, then this will respond the very same way as we do as humans. So the way I got over my years, I got used to seeing you. I know you are a human. You're a real human, right? So if you feed loads of these pictures into this judging AI, and then the generated AI produces stuff until it fools that judging AI, there's probably little you can do to fool a human, okay? Because, probably now it's all very basic. So now maybe we will have algorithms being able to say this is real, not so real. But the GAN field and that whole creative AI field moves at the speed of light. So I wouldn't be surprised if we reach a level when, there's no difference in terms of Turing test, whether this is, a human doing the judgment, the machine doing the judgment, will be all the same. So I think this needs to be really solved at policy level, a bit like, privacy. And you have seen how many problems we had in solving that actually properly. So we are thinking on how to do that. Okay. I don't think it's easy. I really don't think it's easy.
Yeah, it's terrifying and also so exciting, the innovation we're having at the moment, because on the one hand, you've got all of these incredible potentials, but you've got all of these problems that come with it. And I feel like we're struggling to keep up with the problems, but also keep going with the innovation. So it's really interesting. And we've talked about so many cool and exciting things that are happening in the future that you see in the future of your work and other people's work. And obviously you can't reveal everything to us, but I'm just really curious about what you're most excited to work on yourself and in your companies, in your research over the next sort of 5 years or so.
Yeah, so I'm kind of, I'm struggling to answer that because I'm currently a bit repositioning, okay? Because we're now transiting from a 5G era to a 6G era, okay? And I'm trying to understand what that 6G will be, what will it deliver? And then I want to try to figure out why would we need it? And then I want to figure out how we're going to do it, okay? So therefore, I'm kind of a bit in the flux, which is completely normal from an academic point of view. We work in these cycles, right? So we are now currently in the let's go back to the blank drawing board kind of cycle phase, where we really try to come up with completely new and revolutionary ideas. So I can talk you through a few of these, or at least one of these revolutionary ideas I had. One thing I really think we should be doing better is that whole design process, okay? Notably, to build a 5G system, 4G, etc., it takes us a lot of time. So both from a research point of view, but then also somebody needs to translate all these clever algorithms we come up with into code, right? So there are actually programmers, graduates, and PhDs, IT folks who type this in, very smart about it, and it's a very complex process on its own, and then get it essentially deployed. Why don't we automate that? So I'm looking currently at this whole notion of self-synthesizing networks. The idea is that, you would have in the future, people like me still doing research. So I think we're still quite a long way to go until my brain power can be replaced. And I'm not saying this will be ever, never, but at least we are still far away. So imagine I still come up with new innovative ideas, but then it is AI which takes over to translate my ideas into an operational code. So rather than waiting 10 years for my idea to come into your smartphone, it will take 10 milliseconds. Okay, that's what I want to do. I really want to shorten the innovation cycles from something which is gigantic to something which is completely invisible.
Awesome.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And you quickly mentioned 6G, and we've heard a lot of things that are very exciting about 5G. Why should people be excited about 6G, and what are the potentials?
I can't really tell you why people should be excited about 6G, but I tell you something, really nice quote by Hans Vestberg, and he used to be the chief executive of Ericsson and is now the chief executive of Verizon, one of the biggest, if not the biggest US operator. And he said, look, and he said this, you know, maybe 10 years back, and he said, look guys, we started designing 3G when the internet was not around. And we decided, we started to design 4G when the smartphone wasn't around, okay? And equally, we started to design 5G. We started designing 5G 10 years back. It's not now. 10 years back, I started working on maybe 8 years. 8 years back, I started working on 5G, right? And we had no idea that the application will be this very low latency, you know, fully immediate type of immersion type of environment to bring families together in a COVID kind of scenario. So equally with 6G, I know how it will look like because I know what the trend is. I can tell you all the boring facts, but I don't know yet why. And I'm not too worried about this, okay? Because I know the year 2025 will come along and maybe somebody like you will say, you know, call me, say, Mischa, I have a great idea what we could use 6G for. And then suddenly everything will become obvious. So, you know, so therefore, let's not lose patience. Every single generation, we started designing it without knowing why we're doing it.
I love that. And I know Emily and I both have about 1,000 more questions, and we could I'll talk to you for hours, but sadly we're coming to the end. And so I wanted to ask you one final question, and that is for our young audience and our young listeners out there who come from a whole range of backgrounds, abilities and interests. And I just wanted to ask you, what advice or maybe even specific resources can you recommend to them if they're interested in starting to think about the field of tech and AI and STEM for them in the future?
Yeah, so that's a question, a very fundamental question. So I hope I get everybody on the right path here. My answer to this is always, you know, above all, you know, make sure you remain human, okay? So therefore, you know, in terms of resources out there, how to learn, how to understand what AI is, how to program AI, whether you use Python or anything else, you know, anything around 5G, etc. That educational learning path has been democratized. There's an infinite amount of stuff out there. What I think we are lacking really is, you know, is actually that more human capability. Remain humble, you know, remain human, help other people, you know, don't be pretentious. You know, just remain this human part. So I think, you know, our educational systems have become very much goal-driven. You know, marks, you want to be the best, I want to show off. At 10 years, I know how to program AI. And then often these people, you put them in in an environment where they need to actually deal with other humans as a team, whether that is really a programming team or a wider team, including the more senior people who have a lot of experience, etc. They just don't know how to deal with that, okay? So therefore, apart from building up all that hard intelligence, the IQ, we really need to watch out for our emotional intelligence. It's really, really important. And that is maybe the #1 skill I see lacking in the majority of the youngsters who are coming through my door, okay? So I leave you with that message, you know, the hard skill stuff, you will sort it out, you know, it's endless. But on the emotional soft skill part, we need more. We need more leadership. We need more, teamwork. We need more. How do you remain humble, even if I know a lot of stuff, type of thing. That's, guys. Boys and girls, work on that. And please remember this. If that's the only thing you remember from the podcast today, I'm happy.
Thank you, Mischa, so much for coming in and talking to us today. It was so interesting, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Professor Mischa Dohler, for coming to talk to us on this week's podcast episode. For everyone listening, please do share your thoughts and reflections on this week's episode on social media across Twitter, LinkedIn and Instagram, and tag us at Teens in AI Pod or at Teens in AI. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments and reflections. As always, please do keep in contact and stay tuned across our social media platforms and across Spotify, iTunes and YouTube for further updates and episodes. Thank you and goodbye for now.